And we're back. So that one took a lot longer than I expected, probably about 5 minutes, at least on my end. Will depend on how busy the cloud is for you. But we have our Kubernetes cluster created, a whole bunch of stuff that you see up here, but basically, here's our type, here's our location. We basically get a bunch of information. And if this was a little bit, let me pop this over here a bit, you can actually start seeing things on the correct lines and lined up nicely. But want to be able to show both these on the same screen. So clear this out. What we can do is Gcloud compute instances list. And then we're going to basically get a list of this information if you need it again. So where is it located? What's the internal IP, external IP, status, machine type? Again, it's a little bit stretched here, but we see default information that we need to know about our machines. And it's not lining up nicely for me just based on my screen setup. I'm sure for you it's going to look a lot nicer. But we have this now. So actually, you can see it nicely here. There you go. You can look at this in the Cloud Console too, so if you pop over to Kubernetes Engine and clusters, you should see it there. So let's do a quick look to just make sure that it exists. So Kubernetes Engine, clusters. There's my fancy cluster with the exact same information that we see in the Cloud Console, or sorry, in the Cloud Shell. This is the Cloud Console, this is the Cloud Shell. So there you go, you created a cluster. Bravo. Next up, let's deploy the monolith. So basically we are starting from the big massive application that we want to break up here. So let's clear this out. Let's clear this out. There we go. Now we want to deploy it. And again, we have a script for this. So if we take a quick peek at what is inside of it, basically we have a bunch of Gcloud commands. We have a bunch of kube control commands. These are Kubernetes commands for interacting with the Kubernetes engine. So that's that kubectl. Yeah, we have some printf statements. This is a bash script. Basically all it's doing is submitting builds to Google, to one of the services, which we'll talk about very soon, and for deploying the monolith. And again, this is using pre-existing scripts, pre-existing images. It would expect you to have a application already built if you were to go down this path. So we're just going to use their application. Deploy monolith. Yeah, and cloud build is one of the things that we have hopefully talked about in class already at this point, but basically it is kind of part of like a continuous integration pipeline where it's going to build your software based on templates and information that you provide to it. Looks like it's time for another cut. That took about a minute to run. So basically what we want to do now is make sure that we can actually see the monolith application. We want to get its IP address because it is now a deployed and running application. So if we do kube control, kubectl, get service monolith, because that's its name, is monolith. So we see its name, it's a load balancer. Here is its internal IP address. If you remember from our networking module, basically there is an internal and an external IP. Internal should not change. It's going to typically start with a 10 dot or a 100 and something dot number for it to be internal to Google. And again, internal means that your services can all talk to it as long as they're in the same VPC network. External we see as pending because an ephemeral IP has not been assigned yet. If I run this again, I now see the external IP. It has been provisioned and assigned. It's running on port 80, which means it's a standard website. So if I copy and paste this URL or this IP, pop it into my URL, hey, I have a React application. It is a store. Look at all these cool things I can buy. Right? So I can buy a barista kit. I can buy a vintage camera. Here are some orders that have already been set up. So basically, you're coming into a storefront React application with this. And it's load balanced. It's a big application. We want to break it up into pieces. it is possible that IP address changes over time too. Sorry, I was also doing something else. So we'll get rid of that little bleep. So we have a application, right? Remember this IP address as you will continue to use it going forward. So that IP, don't forget it. And we have the kube control get service monolith command to look that up if we need to. Good, good. First thing we want to do is we want to take our orders database, migrate it to a microservice. So basically this big React application, we have a home page, we have a products page, we have an orders page. We want to turn this into a microservice-based application. Right, so we're going to have something run it. And in this case, it's going to be a Docker container. We're going to submit the build of the Docker to Google Cloud Build. Effectively, we're going to separate our concerns out here. So pay very close attention to the order ID. Right now you see ORD dash something. We're going to change it so that it actually looks like all the way down. It should start and or sorry, it should end with dash microservice. So right now it is not a microservice. That's how we're going to kind of sanity check ourselves here. All right, so back to the Cloud Shell. We want to go into microservices, source, orders. So we have created some scripts and some helpers here to help us transition to microservices. Basically, it's just a Docker image of pre-existing microservices here. So the first thing we want to do is do a submission of this image to Google Cloud Build. And what this is basically going to do is it's going to push it to the Google Docker registry, where then our application is going to pull that into itself. That sounds a bit obtuse. Don't worry, it actually isn't that bad. So this will take a few minutes as well. Again, Gcloud is our standard Cloud Console command. We want to submit a build with this particular tag and particular version based on whatever we have in our current directory. So you see a data folder, a Docker file, a K8s folder, it's your Kubernetes information, package.json, so this is probably an NPM application of some kind, right? We have a actual script for a server. Feel free to poke around in here and see what's going on as well. So let me cancel this before we run it. So if we want to look into data, we have an orders.json file. That's probably our list of orders that we see, right? If we look at that, data orders, set it to a sane color for you all. So ORD-00001-microservice. So we're going to basically, again, replace that aspect of our React app with a microservice-based app. We look in the K8s folder. We have some YAML files for Kubernetes. If you check out the server script, we have an Express application for our order management, and basically it's just looking for any call to /orders, and it's going to take over that. Right? We don't necessarily care what the application is. We just care that we can link it up to Kubernetes. So let's go ahead and, oops, that's not what we want. We want this command. We want to submit it to Google. We'll take a hot minute. Okay, and we're back again. I told you there's going to be a lot of little jump cuts here. Basically, a whole lot of text should have scrolled by if you're following along here. And it's just going through making sure that it knows how to build this Docker image and that it can be deployed. So at the end here, you see an ID, a create time, how long it took, the status images. It looks horrible on my screen, but if you look here in the code lab, you see kind of a nice little formatted list. Again, there is a cloud build page here in Google Cloud as well. So it's going to be cloud build. It's kind of down at the bottom. Here we have my builds. So at 11 today, We can get all the history that we want on this particular build if we want to really like go into what this is and what happened and all that fun stuff. So just if you need more details there. You can also monitor it too, right? If we need this kind of historical information to see what build is doing. But for now, let's just go ahead and deploy it. One other thing I should mention too is that we are using some environment variables here. If you are not really familiar with Linux, kind of handy to understand that something like this $brace Google Cloud project, this is a environment variable for us here. If I did echo Google Cloud project, we're going to see actually our project ID. That way we don't have to remember it. We've set it before, we're just going to use the environment variable. We're going to see the same thing here when we use our kube control command. We're going to deploy the image that we just pushed. Creates it, goes very fast, fortunately. And now kube control get all. So we see, hopefully, that everything is up and running. We see that our monolith is ready, our orders is kind of pending. Why is it pending? The container is being created. In a few moments, it'll be up and running and ready to go. So if I run this again, it's still creating, okay. Basically, it is being deployed, and we are waiting for that one-to-one status. Interestingly, what you have done so far is you have spun up the cluster, you created your Docker image for your microservice. It is only available internally to this cluster, right? Nobody else can see it yet. If we go back to our fancy store, the orders have not changed. If we go back and rerun this, okay, so it is ready. So in theory, it is up and running. However, our orders are not being replaced. Oops, what do we do here? Well, we actually have to expose the service for the rest of the world to see it. Now, there is a note in here that you should read very carefully. This is an extremely simplified way of exposing the service. If you go to the public endpoints module, if you kind of look into RESTful calls or things of that nature, basically you don't want to just open yourself up to the entire internet. You want to have very rigorously defined methods for getting into this microservice. Simplified here because there's a lot going on, but be aware that this is the not necessarily the most secure or best way to do things. So let's go ahead and copy and paste their command here. And again, we're going to use the kube control command, so Kubernetes command to expose the orders deployment. We want it to run on port 80. Its target port is port 8081. And we're going to go ahead and run this. That should run very quickly as well. It's just a config tweak. And now, finally, we can get towards checking that our service is running and then reconfiguring the monolithic application to actually use this new microservice. All right, so kube control get service orders. So this is the thing that we just deployed. Again, we are waiting for an external IP because it's ephemeral and we need to have it be assigned. We do have an internal IP address though, so that is good. Right. Once that IP address pops up too, we're going to need to copy and paste it. So here's our external IP. Get that. All right, so we have our external IP for our service. Now we need to take the monolithic application and reconfigure it. So there are some tweaks that we have to make here. So hope you don't mind editing config files because that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So go into our monolithic application, go into the React app, which is the core of our monolith, and let's edit some environment files here. So I'm going to use Vim. Feel free to use Nano or something else. Here we have URLs to our various aspects of our monolithic application. Instead of using them, we're actually going to put in the IP address. And again, this is where you would use an endpoint or something else to be a little bit more security conscious. Right now, it's just pre-baked into the app. Let's turn it into an external call here. So HTTP IP address that you just copy and pasted from the microservice creation, API orders. Okay. Oops. And you can actually check here. This is what I was trying to do, and I forgot the URL. Here it's just going to render out the JSON file that we have for our orders API, but it's going to be pulled into the microservice correctly otherwise. Alrighty. Now, let's rebuild it. So let's get out of Vim, npm run build monolith. Monolith. So we're going to do an npm build with this new reconfiguration, or with this new configuration that we have added in. Keep in mind that it's not just going to magically work, you have to run a build here. And what does that mean for our monolithic application? We have to submit a new build to Google Cloud Build. We have to resubmit it to Kubernetes so that it can pull this image in. Basically, we're kind of retracing our steps here, right? So let's go to Monolith. Let's do a Gcloud build. And we're going to increment the version number here too, you might notice. So before we were 1.0.0, now we're at 2.0.0. And we're back. So that didn't take as long as I thought it did. So we push everything to Google Cloud Build. We have a new build, and we're going to now pull that into Kubernetes. So let's go ahead and deploy our container. Again, we have a nice little handy script that we can copy and paste here. If you popped over to Google Cloud Build, you would see the history of that build as well. So kube control set image deployment / monolith. So again, we want to use the monolith as our application in Kubernetes that we are managing. It is now version 2, so we have to increment this here as well. And let's go ahead and run. Image has been updated, ran a little bit quicker than last time. And if we now go to our fancy store and we refresh it, we still see our store. Our products are still there. Our orders are now populated by the microservice. So what have we done? We broke a chunk off of our monolithic application. We replaced it with a microservice, where that microservice is coming from a Docker container. And it could be whatever you want it to be. We just have a little, little NPM application, probably a React application. And the way I'm talking about it here, if that's not clear, I don't care what the application is. I just know that I have data going into it and data coming out of it. The nitty-gritty behind the scenes to me right now doesn't matter. I could have a Python script running Tornado or Flask. I could have a terminal C++ application running. As long as data is being transmitted into and out of that endpoint, I can populate this microservice, right? So here we see this nice little sanity check that ends with -microservice. It's being populated from our separate application here. So we'll continue on in a moment.